Hello, welcome to Cerulean Arts Gallery. Tonight we're speaking with Allison Syvertsen in conjunction with her Cerulean Arts Collective Exhibition, which is on view now through June 29th. Hello, Allison.
Hi, Mike.
Thanks for being here tonight.
Sure.
So we're gonna go into your gallery, so please tell us about the show.
Um, the show felt very much like following an idea. A lot of times when you're working in the studio, you're just kind of tracing like a line of thought from one thing to the next. So sometimes you can't plan too far in advance, like I'm going to plan a body of work. Sometimes like you just have like a kernel of idea and leads to one thing to another to another. So I've been working on these like cake or cupcake based still lifes for some time, and they started off more as single object studies and then progressed to um, compositions that involved like context or environment or embellishments. And this show is really focusing on the embellishment with the flowers. This body of work actually feels more like floral subject matter than um, like these dessert paintings, even though there's desserts underneath most of these flowers. The piece right now that we're looking at is an older one that sort of was one of the pieces that triggered this line of thought. Still focusing much more on the cake as a subject in and of itself, but adding the flowers on top to make it more of a bouquet arrangement. Um, and that led me to trying to further the idea of flowers, trying to add more of them. The last show, I felt like people were focused very much on cakes as being kind of like almost as being like kind of cute or delectable. And I never really think of the pieces like that so much as like trying to make them look tasty or to make them incite people to buy cupcakes or eat more cake. For me, they're very much formal elements. They're colorful objects that I can sculpt and manipulate and infuse with a lot of color. So that one in particular that we're looking at right now was kind of a reaction to the last show where I just kept adding more flowers on top to make it less about something that you would eat and more about something else. And that's actually the title of the piece is just more, where I just kept adding more flowers and really trying to make it look more like having that fullness of a bouquet of classic flower painting.
And so you're making the flowers, correct?
Yeah, so the flowers are all made out of buttercream. For me, that's a very convenient way of working. It adds more work at the beginning, and in essence, I'm kind of creating a cake sculpture, so to speak. So it adds a lot of time to the art process. But the flowers stay put, unlike real flowers that will wilt or die over time. These just harden and they stay pretty static, which is convenient if you're a slow painter like I am. The piece that we're looking at right now is another piece that's focused on abundance. This one's called Memory of Winter. A lot of times when I'm working, or a lot of times the idea I get for my work comes at various times during the day. A lot of times it's at night when I'm brushing my teeth, getting ready for bed, or in the morning when I'm listening to the radio. I was listening to a book review about plant life, and they talked about plants having a memory of winter. And I just for some reason decided to translate it into this cake painting where it's the white sort of glacial looking frosting and then this abundance of very colorful subject matter on top. And again, it's really less about something that you would want to eat. The flowers on top are so heavy that they're actually sort of crumbling the cake underneath, just adding to that idea of abundance. And the flowers I make, I tried working with other fake flowers like cloth flowers, but um if you're just buying like mass-produced ones, you can tell that they're pretty generic, whereas when you make them, they're very individual, just like real flowers, and they have imperfections and differences from one to another. And so I like that you can tailor them like that. This is an older piece, again, one of the ones that spurred the idea of focusing more on flowers than on cakes, although you can see the cakes more prominently in this one. And this is the idea of expanding into a broader environment, trying to create a sort of garden-like atmosphere out of these confections.
And you're working with wash paint.
Yeah, all of these are gouache, so it's a water-based paint that's opaque like acrylic or oil, so you can layer with it very much in the same way, light over dark. Um, and that's very much in keeping with my style. I tend to layer and maybe fuss a lot. A lot of these paintings are pretty um, material heavy on the surface. There's a lot of layers, and it's kind of building up almost like a cake-like texture in some areas.
Which seems appropriate.
Yeah, in some ways. Well, I mean, it reminds me too of I always love Wayne Thiebaud's work, and he used this sort of thick pull of paint to mimic the sort of texture or flow of icing in the same way. So sometimes you can do a little bit with that with gouache. It doesn't quite have the same body as oil paint, but you can still get that sort of textural effect. It's a little bit more present when you're in front of it in person as opposed to looking at it through the camera. This is one of the pieces where I was starting to shift in my compositions. I came out of a landscape painting background, and when you're landscape painting, oftentimes your composition is very expansive, going to the edge or really beyond the edges of the painting. So I'm always composing like with the idea of the frame meeting at a very specific point in relation to the subject matter. And I found with still lifes, with this one, I cut it off so the still life actually expands a little bit beyond the frame, but in sometimes it felt a little tight. So in some of the other paintings, I allowed a little bit more breathing room. So this is one of the paintings where I was dealing with that sense of tightness and then considering allowing a little bit more space around the subjects going forward.
And it's called Burial.
Yeah, that one's called Burial. It had this sort of tomb-like effect with the dark cake and then this like cluster of flowers, just covering it almost like a like flowers on a tomb or having that sense of just being buried under the weight of something at the same time.
And you're painting from observation.
Yeah, I have trouble working from photographs, even though I understand that's a valid way of working, obviously. I just I'm able to see better and to control my compositions better if I have something set up in front of me. So all of these are creations I've made and I've set up in the studio right next to me as I'm working from them. So my studio often smells kind of sugary, sort of, from these arrangements. This is one where you can barely see the cake underneath. This is an abundance of peonies. The title is Peonies at Dusk, which is actually a Jane Kenyon poem that I've always liked. Um, and I have a fondness, these are buttercream peonies, but I've had a fondness of real peonies. They were outside our house when I was growing up in Vermont. They're just so big and abundant looking, so heavy that they kind of weigh themselves down. So oftentimes they're sort of dragging on the ground. Um, and this is a piece that was sort of influenced by some of the other floral paintings I was looking at by other master painters, in particular Fantin Latour, his 19th century flower paintings. Just have a beautiful freshness to them, like kind of an honesty the way he's translating the petals through brush strokes. Um, but at the same time, a simplicity. They don't have quite the sense of opulence of some like earlier like Dutch flower paintings, which I really like, but his have a like a more pared down version, even though they are very intricate and very honest looking. He has in particular, he has one of the paintings I was looking at, it looks like a lower like basket or vase with the flowers spilling out. And had that as actually a screen background for a long time. And then when I set up that arrangement, it reminded me a little bit of it. The piece next to it is called Moon. That was another piece that the idea came to me when I was, I think, getting ready for bed one night. I had often looked at the white flowers I had made as having a sort of starlight or moonlight quality to them. So in this one, I had an idea for just simplifying. A lot of these other compositions are very abundant. On a few of these, I chose to focus on paring it down to one flower. Still focusing on the flower more so than the cake. The cake is really functioning more as a pedestal for this one. And it's very pared down in terms of its palette. It's mostly yellows and blues, just trying to create a sort of moonlight atmosphere. This
This is
one,
called Thinking of Another.
yeah, and actually, the another is Morandi, but I always feel embarrassed citing a master artist in relation to my work because it's not remotely in the same ballpark, but that's the another I was thinking of, but it also has a lot of breathing space. I mentioned how I was trying to allow a little bit more space around the subject matter. And sometimes having that extra surface space also feels like sort of contemplative space for the viewer. So it invites the idea of like maybe thinking beyond the subject matter just by having all that room around it. But Morandi does these beautiful flower paintings. He did a series of them, mostly in the 1950s. And in particular, he had several where he had these vases with these vertical ridges on them that I really liked. So actually, the in this one, the cake looks very much more like a traditional vase, but that is a cake that the flowers are mounted on. It's actually two cupcakes stacked on top of each other that I frosted over and carved into. And it's actually two cupcakes from other pieces in the exhibition. There's an Easter piece and a Russian tip tulips piece, and I just recycled the cupcakes from those to make into this. But I just wanted a piece that looks like more classically beautiful and contemplative, very much aiming for the mood that I get when I look at Morandi, even though my painting style is very different. These are a series of drawings. I'm a slow painter, so I wanted to add some drawings to the work. I do a fair bit of drawing. I'm always sketching all these paintings in advance, doing a number of thumbnails and oftentimes rough studies. These drawings aren't highly refined drawings. They're more akin to what I'm doing as preparatory work, just with a slight extra amount of finish to them. So I thought at the very least that they could be sort of informative toward my process or in keeping with it. So this is actually a study of the previous piece, just a different view of it, the thinking of another piece, just a different angle. It was actually one of the studies I did when I was trying to figure out which composition I did, and I just expanded it into a larger drawing. And the piece next to it is a study of some of the flowers. Oftentimes after I finish these pieces, I don't know what to do with the flowers because they're sort of crumbling. They do hold up and harden over time, but after a while they sort of crumble or they have like the remnants of the frosting from the cakes that they were on top of. But I always feel sort of bad about just throwing them away. So sometimes I sketch them out or sometimes I paint them just as kind of a way to part with them. So those are peonies. they're a little harder edged than like the actual flowers, just because I tend to have a stronger sense of line. So in some ways they look a little bit like artichokes, but it's very much in keeping where when I'm sketching out for a painting that my drawings tend to be very line oriented, even though they do tend to get translated into brushstroke and color. And then these paired pieces in the hallway. The piece on the right is an older piece. It's not specifically floral, although it does have some of that quality in terms of the ornate quality of the frosting on top. So trying to think less about a cake and more about the design or the embellishments. And that was a chocolate cake, and I wanted to paint a chocolate cake without it being brown. So I had some lighting effects that cast like a really red hue on top of the frosting and then a blue background. The piece next to is the Russian tips tulips. That was a grocery store cupcake. Russian tips are it's just a like a piping tip that you can use rather than like swirling the frosting around to make the individual petals. A Russian tip just has a arrangement of holes where you can just plop it on and it just creates all those petals all at once. It was a cupcake that I bought knowing that I needed to use it for another composition, but I felt bad just discarding this topping, so I wanted to do a quick study of it before I dismantled it and used it for something else. So overall, the show is, again, just very focused more on the idea of a variation of flower painting. Sometimes I feel like the flowers should mean something in my life. I don't quite know what that is yet or why I've chosen to paint them. They are a little less transitory, or they are a little bit more lasting than regular flowers just because they're manufactured. So maybe that has something to do with the sort of manufactured beauty or manufactured creation of nature. But right now it's a thought that I'm interested in following.
So, Allison, on June 28th, you're going to teach a gouache painting workshop.
Yeah, that's right. Gouache is remarkably easy to get started in, and sometimes a workshop, even just a one-day class, can um, help jumpstart you or just save you the time of a lot of personal research by just getting a heads up on the basic materials and how to use them. So it's a basic still life painting class, but introducing the materials of gouache and some basic application techniques and layering effects.
Well, Allison, it's a wonderful show.
Thank you.
And the show is up through June 29th. We hope people come down to see it. And everything's also available on the website, ceruleanarts.com, including Allison's workshop on the studio page. Well, thank you so much for being here and have a great night.
Thank you. You too, Mike.